Hello, this is Dr. Jonathan Bentovish, and I'm recording a special recording for the Keynote opening lecture for Aerospace 2021, an important conference. I apologize from the get start. First of all, it's constrained by time, so it's only 30 minutes rather than a full hour. I'm also recording this because it's a holy day just about to come for the Jewish people, and so I cannot do it live, so I apologize for that. But nevertheless, I think it's a very important keynote opening lecture, and the title of that lecture is, of course, God's Physics, New 21st Century Paradigm, Empirical and Theoretical Ramifications. And perhaps I'll just start by mentioning the fact that a book just came out by the name of God's Physics, and that follows by iUniverse.com, and that follows the publication of over 50 peer-reviewed scientific articles, including 2 special issues and the 3rd just coming up. Increasingly, this God's Physics theory or new paradigm for 21st century is being accepted and being invited. I'm being invited to open international keynote, deliver international keynote opening talk for international conferences, such as this one, the Aerospace 2021. I think we stand at a historic time. I want to just highlight the major findings and major ramifications of this new God's Physics paradigm. I'd mentioned the fact that initially this God's Physics theory or paradigm has been called the Computational Unified Field Theory, and that was with respect to Einstein's famous quest for a unifying field theory. And that's perhaps a good place to start, because we realize, all of us realize, that physics is undergoing a major paradigmatic crisis, and in fact now a paradigmatic shift from the old, what I termed a Material-Causal paradigm of 20th century physics. That old Material-Causal paradigm underlie relativity theory, Einstein's general relativity theory, and quantum mechanics. The old paradigm, this old Material-Causal paradigm, has reached what Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, called a paradigmatic crisis. And Thomas Kuhn pointed out that the development of any scientific discipline is characterized by phases, alternating phases of standard science, in which a certain paradigm, such as, for example, now the old Material-Causal paradigm of 20th century relativity theory and quantum mechanics, a standard paradigm is useful for a certain while. It explains phenomena, it gives good tools, investigative tools and theoretical framework to study a certain discipline and phenomena. But then Thomas Kuhn tells us that the science inevitably reaches what he calls a paradigmatic crisis and a paradigmatic shift, where the old paradigm, the standard old paradigm, is not good enough any longer, simply for the reason that, first of all, we find at that time of a paradigmatic crisis and a paradigmatic shift, we find at that time that there are inconsistencies, theoretical inconsistencies, between the 2 pillars of a given paradigm. So, for example, relativity theory and quantum mechanics seem to contradict each other. Relativity theory, for example, states that there is the speed of light barrier for the transmission of information signals across space and time, and quantum mechanics, with obviously the well-known quantum entanglement phenomena and Bell's experiment, indicating that in fact certain information, certain measurements can affect and cross, so to speak, space and time well beyond the speed of light barrier. There's other elements that indicate this theoretical inconsistency. Over and beyond that, the old Material-Causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics of 20th century physics, the old Material-Causal paradigm has an intrinsic major problem, empirical problem, and that is that in order to explain the accelerated expansion of the universe, the only way that old Material-Causal paradigm can do that is by assuming that there exists what is called a purely hypothetical concept of dark energy and dark matter. Now, after 2 decades of intense investigations trying to detect that elusive, purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy concepts, after 2 full decades and numerous experimentations, dark matter, dark energy could not be detected empirically, experimentally. And so that is a major problem for the old material-causal paradigm, and it fits very well with Kuhn's analysis, Thomas Kuhn's analysis of a paradigmatic crisis and a paradigmatic shift. And he tells us that at those times, science and scientists have to examine and test, and usually science moves from the old standard paradigm to a new paradigm. The new paradigm is usually much more expansive and includes the old paradigm as a specific case. And obviously maybe the greatest example for that, glaring example for that, is obviously Einstein's relativity theory, when Newtonian mechanics, by the way, also assumed that there existed a purely hypothetical ether concept, which Einstein discarded after the ether concept could not be detected experimentally, just as I've done now, discarding the dark matter, dark energy concepts as superfluous, the same way that Einstein discarded the ether concept as superfluous because it could not be detected. But in any event, at those points in time where the old paradigm is not sufficient any longer, there's theoretical inconsistencies, there are experimental data that cannot be explained, such as the accelerated expansion of the universe, and assuming that can be explained by dark matter, dark energy, comprising up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe, but yet could not be detected. So when we reach that point in time and that crisis, Thomas Kuhn tells us we need to shift into a new paradigm. And I started mentioning Einstein's relativity theory because it's very clear that at these critical times of a paradigmatic shift, what eventually decides, and the way that science eventually is able to embrace a new theory, a new paradigm, much more expansive paradigm, is when we get a critical prediction, a unique critical prediction, empirical critical prediction of the new paradigm that once tested and verified, like when Einstein was calling cosmologists and astronomers to test the double value prediction of Mercury's perihelion pathway around the sun due to the curvature of space-time by the sun. So when we get such critical predictions, that was verified by Eddington, the famous British astronomer, in 1919 solar eclipse. One of the 50-plus articles that I've published is called The New Solar Eclipse of 21st Century Physics, and that is related to what I'm going to mention, one of the unique critical predictions of God's physics, new paradigm, which differentiates it from the old material-causal paradigm. But before I do that, I just want to highlight the fact that we stand at a critical point where we are undergoing physics. 21st century physics is undergoing a paradigmatic shift from the old material-causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics of 20th century physics to the new God's physics paradigm, computational unified field theory, of 21st century physics. And the way to do that is essentially when we have this two things. One, the new paradigm has to resolve those theoretical inconsistencies, has to offer an alternative explanation for some of these unexplained phenomena, such as, for example, the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion without the discarded dark matter, dark energy concepts, purely hypothetical concepts. But over and beyond that, the new paradigm has to be able to identify at least one or two critical predictions, at least one critical prediction that is unique to the new paradigm and that cannot be explained, if verified experimentally, cannot be explained by the old paradigm. And that's exactly where we stand. So just in highlighting the points, first of all, the new God's physics paradigm, again, over 50 peer-reviewed articles, 2 special issues, books, opening lectures and keynote lectures in multiple international conferences, such as this Aerospace 2021 lecture, keynote opening lecture. So far, the new God's physics or computational unified field theory paradigm has been was shown capable of resolving the apparent inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and it's been able to replicate most, if not all, relativistic and quantum phenomena. It's been able to discard dark matter, dark energy, and offer an alternative explanation, which I'll get into, I hope that the time allows, that's related to the critical prediction, one of two critical predictions of God's physics new paradigm. The gist of, before I get to that, let me just explain some of the key theoretical postulates of this new God's physics paradigm, which is very exciting, opens tremendous possibilities for physics, aerospace, science, biology, technology, life science, etc. So the major discovery made by God's physics new paradigm is essentially the discovery that in order to unify between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, there is the discovery of what I call a singular higher ordered universal computational principle, or universal consciousness principle, acronym UCP. And that UCP, universal computational / consciousness principle, computes simultaneously all the exhaustive spatial pixels of the universe. So imagine that you have a series of frames. I gave the cinematic film metaphor because when we see a film going on, it seems that the plane is zooming through the screen, but yet when we stop the frames, we see obviously that the plane is stationary, but there is a displacement between the frames, which gives us the measure of the energy, and so forth and so on. So the new God's physics paradigm, computational unified field theory paradigm, essentially discovers that there is this UCP that simultaneously computes a series of universal frames. It does so according to the theory, in this incredibly rapid rate, unfathomable rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us 1.36 in the power of -50 per second. So many trillions of times per second, or many trillions of frames, universal frames of the whole universe are being computed, are being created simultaneously, each frame by this UCP. Between one frame, universal frame, and another universal frame, subsequent universal frame, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. So there's some similarities to what's happening in the film, because we see the white light in between the frames. In this case, it's not white light, it's all the spatial pixels are absorbed and dissolved back into this UCP. So at each trillionth of a trillionth, etc., of a second, the UCP creates the whole universe, dissolves it back into itself, and then recreates the universe a little bit more elaborate. Actually, the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion is not due to dark matter, dark energy. It's due to the addition of an incremental number of spatial pixels for each consecutive frame. And as a matter of fact, in a specific time during the year, which I'll get into, there is a leap, a non-continuous leap in the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. So the discovery of this new universal computational / consciousness principle, UCP, which produces the entire universe at this incredible rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, 1.36 in the power of -50 per second. This is a major discovery, and some ramifications from this discovery, I'll just add. It's very elaborate. Obviously, it's very hard to recapitulate in 30 minutes or less. But what I will highlight the essence. The essence is that this universal computational principle possesses three computational dimensions. Two of them are very important for us, which is the framework, whether the computation relates to the entire frame, or whether the computation relates to an object, to the constituting pixels values of a given object. So framework, which includes frame or object, and consistency, which relates to the degree of consistent or inconsistent measurements of relative to the frame or object across frames. So we actually get what I call a universal computational formula for this first time in physics. We have a complete unification. It's, by the way, depicted at the bottom of this book, Universal Computational Formula. And at the heart of this Universal Computational Formula is a representation of this UCP, represented by the Hebrew letter Yud, and that UCP computes at the rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant a series of universal frames, and for each pixel, comprising pixel within that universal frame, the universal computational principle computes simultaneously the space, time, energy, and mass, and in the equation, so it equates space times energy divided by time, time multiplied by mass. So this is the universal, at the heart of the universal computational formula. It's the first time, in effect, that physics unifies completely between the four basic physical features of space, time, energy, and mass. Just let's remind us all that in Einstein's general relativity theory, which was a huge leap for science, Einstein, the great Einstein, was able to unify between space and time, which became a four-dimensional continuum, energy and mass, the E equals mc square, energy mass equivalence, famous equation, and also the curvature of space-time by massive objects. But still, those four basic physical features were not completely unified. And in this universal computational formula, this is the first time in physics that God's physics new paradigm, or computational unified field theory, is able to completely unify between space, time, energy, and mass in one equation. And they're all, in a sense, byproducts, computational byproducts of this UCP's computation of frame or object, consistent or inconsistent, which actually gives us the four combination of space, time, energy, and mass. By the way, again, very significant ramification of this new God's physics paradigm. Obviously, we know one direct ramification: the four forces of nature. Three of them have been unified, but the gravitational force has been left out. And in this new universal computational formula, they're all unified. So that's one thing, the universal computational formula, and the first time that space, time, energy, and mass are all unified as byproducts, computational byproducts of this universal computational principle. Another major advancement or major breakthrough, theoretical breakthrough made by this new paradigm is the fact that this new paradigm, God's physics paradigm, is called an acausal computational paradigm. And the idea is that since the UCP computes simultaneously all the spatial pixels in the universe simultaneously for each frame, so there cannot be any cause and effect relationship, any material-causal interaction even, in any given single or multiple frames. Just to make it maybe a little bit more amicable for our common sense understanding, I give the metaphor of if you saw a film and you saw a glass filled with water or juice, and you saw a hammer here, I use the cell phone, and you see in the film the hammer hitting the glass, and then the glass breaking and the water spilling on the table. Commonsensically, we would think that the hammer has caused the breakage of the glass. But when we look at the film more closely, and that's just a metaphor to explain this new acausal computational paradigm, when we look at the film closely, we see that in the first frame, both of them presented simultaneously. Second frame, the same. Third frame, the same. Even in the frame that they're touching each other, they're still being presented simultaneously. So therefore, the new God's physics paradigm reasons that there cannot be any cause and effect in reality, because at each consecutive universal frame, all pixels are presented simultaneously, so there cannot be any cause and effect, any material, causal, physical interaction. Obviously, between one frame and another, the whole universe dissolves back into the UCP, so obviously there cannot be any interaction between the frames. That is quite far-reaching, and so that new acausal computational paradigm negates some basic assumptions that physics held dear to, such as the Big Bang model, because even if there was an initial nuclear event, in reality, in truth, there could not have been any interaction between the various particles or masses in the first frame, second frame, third frame. In any of these frames, there could not be really any real interaction. Rather, we would say, same way that the director of the film arranges those film frames in such a way that it seems that they're getting closer to each other, and then they have impact, and then the water is spilled, we have to draw the same conclusion, that the causality and the laws of physics that we're accustomed to see, they're arranged by this UCP through the arrangement of the film frames. So in deeper analysis of this new causal computation God's physics paradigm, we start looking at the universe in a different way. It was not created by an initial Big Bang nuclear event. It's actually being created and recreated many trillions of times per second by this UCP. And the expansion of the universe, and that's a good point that maybe I'll get to one of the two critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. It's very important because I want to call and encourage astronomers and cosmologists. Excuse me. So I want to encourage astronomers and cosmologists. I've called in multiple papers for astronomers and cosmologists to test one of the critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. And one of those critical predictions, which are unique to God's physics paradigm and cannot be explained, as a matter of fact, by the old Material-Causal paradigm, one of these unique critical predictions is related to what I call the collective human consciousness focus postulate. That's one of the postulates of this new God's physics paradigm, which essentially says that any time that you have a collective human consciousness focus, many millions of human beings focusing on this universal consciousness principle, i.e. God in religious terms, but in scientific terms, whenever you have a large group of individuals focusing on this universal consciousness principle or reality, you would then have, this is a prediction, a non-continuous leap increase in the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. And so what I've called cosmologists and astronomers to do, and I'm on this stage as well, calling astronomers, cosmologists, leading universities to collaborate with me directly. I will give my personal email so that people can communicate with me directly and easily. That would be Dr. Bentovish, all lowercase letters with no punctuation, drbentwich @gmail.com, drbentwich @gmail.com, and to communicate with me directly, because now we need to do a verification of which would be equivalent to what Eddington did in the 1919 solar eclipse, and that is to measure the rate of the universe's accelerated expansion before I chose the Jewish Rosh Hashanah this year. That's a new year of the Jewish people, in which millions of Jews are all focusing on this universal consciousness reality, i.e. God in religious terms. But in any event, so on 7th and 8th of September 2021, which just passed, I called astronomers, cosmologists to test the rate of the universe's expansion, accelerated expansion, before the 7th and 8th of September 2021, during that time and after that time. And I predicted, according to this new God's physics paradigm and the collective human consciousness focus postulate, that there will be a non-continuous increase in the rate of the universe's accelerated expansion beginning from 7th and 8th of September and carrying out through the next Jewish year. To the extent that astronomers, cosmologists would verify that, and therefore I'm calling astronomers and cosmologists to communicate with me directly for the interpretation of the results and a dialogue on that. But in any event, when and if astronomers, cosmologists verify that indeed on this Jewish Rosh Hashanah collective human consciousness focus 2 days special time interval, the 7th, 8th of September 2021, if indeed there has occurred a non-continuous increase in the accelerated rate of the expansion of the universe during that time and carrying over through the next year, that would be an unequivocal verification of the new God's physics paradigm. Another, by the way, prediction, just very briefly, I called, and look at my articles, it's elaborated, I called subatomical accelerators. to test another critical prediction having to do with the greater number of times that a more massive particle such as the muon would be measured across a fine temporal measurement time interval relative to relatively less massive particles. But I cannot elaborate on that. I am calling leading universities, astronomers, cosmologists to communicate with me directly so that we can advance together this new God's physics paradigm and validate it. I think that in the next few minutes that I have left, I just want to highlight why this new God's physics paradigm is so significant. Not only it unifies between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, not only it unifies for the first time between the four basic physical features of space, time, energy, and mass, the four forces of nature. This is the first time in physics that we discover a huge window of opportunity. The speed of light barrier is, in a sense, transcended. Again, hard to explain in a brief period of time, but that's one of the ramifications of this theory. Time can be reversed due to the computation of time by the UCP, which is the degree of object inconsistency across frames. Time can be reversed, at least theoretically, and I believe also empirically. It's the first time in physics that human consciousness, such as in the collective human consciousness focus postulate, it's the first time in physics that human consciousness starts playing a very significant role. And very briefly, we see, according to this new God's physics paradigm, that there are, for the UCP, there exists the whole bulk of pictures of universal frames from the inception of the universe until its ultimate, what I call perfected Geula state goal, which is a state in which science, humanity discovers the oneness and the singularity of this universal consciousness reality, including its moral aspects, all goodness aspects, etc. But it's the first time in physics that human consciousness, this moral principle, I started speaking about the fact that this universal consciousness principle, reality, embeds within it what I call a super-spatial temporal reservoir of all the past, present, and multiple possible futures for each individual human being, which is computed by this universal consciousness principle according to the moral choices that each of us makes at each point in time. And so I think that this new God's physics paradigm is a very exciting development for science and for physics. Perhaps I'll end by saying, first calling astronomers, cosmologists to carry out those critical predictions so that the whole of the scientific community, which is more and more accepting and embracing this new God's physics paradigm, a necessary development for science, so that we can all validate it and accept it as a new 21st century paradigm. I'll perhaps end by, I began by saying that I have great admiration for Einstein's visionary quest back then for the unifying field theory, which I called this theory initially the computational unified field theory. And Einstein, being a great scientist and a humble scientist and human being, was asked what would he wish for the fate of his relativity theory to be in 100 years. I believe that was around 1919 or 1921. And Einstein, being a very humble and great scientist, and he was asked, do you believe that relativity theory will hold true in 100 years or forever? And Einstein, being a real great scientist and a humble scientist, those things seem to go together. He said, no, I believe that my relativity theory would not last or hold true forever. In 100 years, he said, I just hope that my general relativity theory will become a special case within a broader generalization or understanding. And that's exactly where we stand. God's physics paradigm has embedded and transcended and unified relativity theory and God's physics, relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and it's in a sense fulfilling Einstein's vision and quest. So it's a very exciting time, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present this breakthrough in 21st century theoretical physics, also in this important conference, the Aerospace 2021. Thank you very much.